Hi, my name is Carol Zirkel and I'm an artist from southwestern Montana and I do pastel paintings, and today I'm trying something new. I thought maybe you would like to see the actual creation of the painting that I'm putting out there. So this is the picture that I'll be doing today. It's a sunset picture straight from my own backyard. So let's get to it. Okay, the first thing that I'm doing here is I have a 6x4 piece of paper. It's kind of the back side of the paper. It's really smooth paper. It's not sanded paper, but it's pastel paper. The front side of pastel papers typically have a little bit of a texture to it, but I like the back side that doesn't have so much. And I take a little bit of a pencil here, and I'm going to just kind of try to do an outline of my main figures on the piece. So I'm doing my mountain skyline there, and you'll recall that there's a bigger cloud that comes this way. And all I'm really trying to do is just sort of map out where I'm going to put the pieces. And then there's a real cool little cloud up here. The next step that I'm going to do is what a lot of painters would call blocking in, or trying to get a base color in there. Basically, when I'm doing my pastels, I use a chalk that looks like this. It's a Nu Pastel, NU Pastel, and it's a harder than a lot of the other kind of pastel chalks are. And a lot of people use the harder ones at the beginning because it holds to the paper, and if you put on a more soft chalk afterwards, that color holds better. If you put the soft chalk on first, then it's kind of like, I don't know, if you grease something up and then you try to put something over top of it, it doesn't hold very well. So that's why they kind of do that. And what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to get this dark color underneath. I'm basically doing my painting in layers. And you'll see what I'm talking about. The first step is to do a kind of a step where I'm trying to match the density or the darkness of the color, and I'm thinking about it in as like how it goes back in real life. So for example, I see the blues of the sky and I know that the clouds are in front of it, so in my mind's eye I think about that. And I also kind of squint my eyes, and if you squint your eyes you can see that there are some parts that are real dark. When you squint your eyes, it sort of takes a lot of the detail out, so you really see those dark spots a little bit better. That's just a little secret that artists use. And then there's a real dark outline on here, and I'm kind of trying to match the color that's there, or the color I think is behind the final color you see. There's 96 colors, shades of colors in my box of pastels, and there's more colors than that your eye will see, so I will be doing some mixing and some layering on top of each other. One of the things I think about when I'm painting is that there's something called a composition, and that is basically how your eye kind of travels through the picture. Where are things located on that picture? And part of the beauty of the color is color in and of itself can take you through. So if you were to take out every single color, every color has its own composition. So if I'm using this brown, I want to make sure that I'm making a composition with it that will work. I take my next color and I'll be doing the same. Now, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put in some of this blue. It doesn't have to be perfect at this stage, but I'm trying to cover the paper, and I don't know, the reason that we do that is that if you don't do it, you're going to end up with like white spots behind all of your colors, and that's a little distracting for people. So now I'm putting in some oranges, and I'm going to put a little bit up here. You can see it's real dark, and so I'll probably end up with several different colors of yellows or oranges to make my piece. There's a little bit of the orange down here, and I want to make sure to include it while I still have that pastel in my hand. It's a little different than mixing colors with a brush. It's kind of fun. So I'm putting a little, and I'm even putting some orange down in here, because that way my colors will definitely blend together. Turns out there's a little bit of kind of a greenish hue in here. And there's several ways you could do that. You could mix a yellow with a blue, or you could put a green on there like I'm doing, and I've done it both ways. I probably will continue to. I'm putting in a little bit of a kind of a goldish color, and I'm building up the colors. I'm not blending it yet, but I will. And on a sanded paper, a lot of pastel artists don't do a whole lot of blending with their hand. Well, partly because it's sanded and you hurt yourself, I know, because I've done that. But also because the pastel being a dry chalk, there's a sort of the particles of the chalk itself sort of stand up or lay down, and if you use your finger to rub it and blend it in, it tends to dull the colors, which in my situation I think is fine, just so long as the dulled parts are in the right portion of the painting. So you can see I'm really making some of these little clouds and the background's a little bit darker with this blue. It's a real dark blue. And let's see, kind of go with maybe a little bit more of a bright orange. It's hard to see that on here maybe, but it will help blend together some of these colors. And sticking some in here and in here and here. Then I'm going to kind of get a more purpley color in here, and what I'm doing is, this is really my first layer. There's going to be several layers. I like to think of it as three. The base coat, and then the next one kind of defines it, and then the final coat is where we do the definition. That's generally speaking, sometimes doesn't work out that nice. Okay, so let's see, I'm going to put a little bit lighter color in here. This is actually sort of a peachy pink, and make a little bit of contrast in this cloud. Make sure to put a little bit down in here and also in here. Okay, maybe one more yellow, and then we're almost done with our first layer. There you go. Now the fun part comes after the first layer, as I rub the colors into the paper so that there's no white marks left on the paper, and I rub real hard in there, and if I put more than one color in one particular place, it will actually blend to a different like a blended color, as if you were using water or some other kind of a liquid to mix the colors, like if you were doing a watercolor or you were doing an oil painting. It's the same sort of a deal. When I go to the next levels and the next layers and I start to put down more color over the top of it real lightly, it's almost like what they would call glazing, which is sort of one color underneath and one color over top. So they're not mixed together so much. It's kind of confusing because you say, well, it's just chalk, but it's doable. I try not to get too many of the parts too mixed up. I kind of do each, you can see that, each color at a time. So this really dark one, I don't go just all over. I go right where it's supposed to be, the best that I can. because it sort of dyes the other parts. It dyes the ink, the paper, and it dyes the surrounding colors. So in here I need to do a little cleanup. So that is step one. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is kind of step two is going to be to go back over and to add some highlights. So if you really look at these papers, and one little trick that I use is if you watch an inkjet print, you'll see that there's the kind of bluish color and the reddish color, the yellow and the black, and those four colors create all the colors that you see on your printer, which is pretty amazing. So if you start to look really close at what colors they are, you can almost pick that out. So there's sort of a purplish color up in here, and that really kind of brightens it up. And I'm not doing it too hard over there. I'm doing it just sort of over the top, and I'm using my pinky because it's the least pressure finger on there. You know, I'm not really trying to do anything harsh about it. And I'm trying to put a little purple in here, and there's a little purple in there, and then down at the bottom, and that will keep my eye going. Kind of brightens it up. Now, put a little down in this guy. This is your kind of star of the show down here, and then over here. Now, one of the things that's really neat about the photography, and a lot of people have, you know, will say things about using photographs, that you shouldn't do it and all that. But the thing about a photograph is, I like it. To me, it's like you're using a tool to your advantage, especially when if you were to be learning how to do pastels or any other kind of artwork, and the subject matter stays really still. I have a passion, I guess, for sunsets and sunrises. I just have always taken pictures of them, and if you snap your camera and you turn around and snap all the way around you, by the time you've gotten all full circle, you'll find that the sky's already changed, and there's no way you can get the detail that you want to get if you're not using a photograph, and that's just my opinion. But okay, so that kind of puts a little bit of color in there. I'll start to put in sort of a yellow or oranges here, so real orange. And it's sort of like the transition points. To me, a cloud is a three-dimensional thing. I try to picture in my mind. I picture things as best I can in a three-dimensional fashion, and what comes closest to you and what is farthest away from you. And try to picture in my head. Okay, I try to picture being that cloud for a little while. And the colors that show up on clouds, it's just like many other things. To my way of thinking, everything has every color depending on how the light's hitting it. So a cloud is very similar to that. If these clouds are closest to the horizon that the sun is going down or coming up from, they tend to get the brightest colors. The land, on the other hand, tends to get more and more dark, more and more muted. And so I am totally happy doing a silhouette if I need to do a silhouette. And if you were looking at that scene in real life, you would the ground would not be nearly as dark looking towards the sun as it is on the photograph. And so I realize that, but it doesn't bother me. So I just do it that way. Between the sky and the land, on the photograph in particular, you can really see it. There's usually one color that's sort of an aura around this, and it's actually sort of a reddish purple. And I got a little bit of that this last time. This is that same color from before, and I just kind of do try to get as close a line as I can. I mean, it is chalk, but you can do a little bit, and try to capture some of that aura. My land isn't exactly perfectly the same, but you know, the subject matter is really the clouds. So I'm going to put that in there as kind of to hold my line a little bit. And I'm going to blend it in just a little bit. And then what I can do to kind of get that aura a little bit closer is I'm going to take another color here. In this case, it's sort of a yellowish color. And I'm just going to lightly build my line from the other side of it, in other words, the sky side of it. And so it's kind of, to get a really fine line, especially with pastel, you kind of want to build, or I do anyway, build both sides of the object, and it kind of cleans it up. And I really try to brighten it up so that it looks like that sun is really kind of playing off of those hills just a little bit. Okey-dokey. And I can redefine some of these these hills a little bit better with this method and sharpen it up. Now I can also kind of put in some of that same matching thing. You know, the world is a very reflective place, and so these clouds are really reflecting this light. And I guess I was saying earlier that I see that everything has every color depending. Well, if you're thinking about the clouds and you're thinking about kind of that rainbow effect, not all the colors show up at any one time necessarily, but it kind of give you a leg up on trying to figure out, you know, how do you get that particular effect or look by saying, well, how would it go in the rainbow? And you can see kind of a purple and, you know, purplish and orangey red and yellow kind of a thing. And I'm going to just keep defining this a little bit more. Okay. And then I have sort of a pink color. And this is, to me, you know, part of the pastels is that you have to kind of mix different odd colors together to get your effect. If you were having tubes of paint or something, you could mix different, you know, probably have less colors of paint as far as the numbers of tubes you have, but the options are still there. So when you have all the, it probably wasn't clear, but when you're doing it with chalk and you have it's all one color at a time, I think it's a lot easier when you have a little bigger set of pastels so that you can kind of improvise. Some of it's blended and some of it is just a kind of a blended out of the box kind of color. So we're just going to pinken this up a little bit. Cloud there, and that kind of brightens it up a little. The chalk kind of falls on itself. Some people tip the drawing board forward so it doesn't drop so much, but I guess I've never really done that. So now this bigger looking piece of chalk, that is a different brand. I believe that's a Rembrandt, and it's a little softer. And when I say you could put that over the top of the harder or semi-hard pastels, and I just barely touch it in there. That way it tends to stay better. This stays better on top of a new pastel brand, which is a harder. And if you try to build up your base with these softer ones, and then come back with the more semi-hard, it would be like oil and water. It doesn't really work that way. A lot of painting is done that way when you're doing oil painting. You put the thinner, kind of more dry, less oil in it on the base of it, and then you can put more oil mix more oil into your colors to create the top parts. It's kind of just a little trick people use. Works better. So I'm kind of trying to lighten up some of this. I don't know if you could see, but I'm lightening up some of this in here and kind of going back and forth, and I'm just really just trying to build, is my second step here, just trying to build and get that integrity of the contrast in there. To me, each piece is, if you're going to rate the piece, I try to simplify it by what I would call the 3 C's: composition, color, and contrast. And there are other things you can consider too, but I don't remember all of them at the right times. It's hard enough to rate on just 3 things from my point of view. But so I'm looking at that. I want to make sure I'm really lightening this up, and I could put other colors on top of it. So it's kind of whitish looking, but and there's this little line of this really light kind of thing underneath there. So that's what I like to call an aura. It's just kind of the outline of what you're looking at, and if you put it in there, it tends to it tends to look a little more realistic, I think. So I'm putting in a little bit here and there. Okay, then I want to take maybe and check this blue a little bit. It's kind of what they call muddy. And muddy just means that the colors are mixed together to a degree where they don't create, the third color, but they just kind of get grayish looking or brownish looking. That's what happens when you mix colors, too carefully. I go back over the parts where I want it to be a little more brilliant blue, and I just put that blue right on top of there, and kind of just blend it enough so that it kind of looks smooth. Now, a lot of people with pastels, there's lots of different techniques for pastels. Some of the pastels, the end result looks kind of like you see the actual strokes that the person used, and that's very fun and interesting look. It's sort of, well, I heard it described in one article as kind of a calligraphy, which is really neat. Mine, I tend to like to try to make it, especially the blue parts, look really smooth, because to me that's what they look like. And so I kind of developed my technique mostly from reading books and trying it. When I moved to Montana, there's a lot of miles between people in Montana. And so it's not like there are a lot of artists in Montana. Probably, I think I read a statistic that said that 1 in 80 working adults is a working artist of some sort, whether it's in theater or the fine arts, music, whatever. So it's very highly populated with artist types. But that doesn't mean that we live close to each other. So I kind of had to develop my own little style by myself, and used books to try to understand. And part of the reason I'm practicing with my DVDs here is I would like to put my style down on DVD, because I think it's a little bit easier to see it if you can actually see a person doing the work. So that kind of cleaned up that blue. Now we're going in and kind of adding in a really nice bright peachy orange to it. Not sure that shows up on the video, but there's a little bit of that same color running through this guy. And kind of under here. It kind of brings out a sort of a glow. And I might just do it down here too, just to clean up that kind of orangey color. Not wanting to go over the land part too much, because I want to keep that line a little bit. And then, let's see. I want to put some sort of a transition here between the yellow and the orange and the blue. I guess I'm doing that with my yellow. And there you see I got my green back. It's kind of an iterative process. You start With one color, you add the other to it. Sometimes you lose a color, you have to put it back in. It's just part of the game. So I want to sort of lighten this up a little bit. The cool thing about just the sky, and I'm talking about when there's no clouds in front of the sky for you to see, is that it's not just blue sky. It transitions from the horizon up, and because the sun is on the other side of that hill, at the horizon line it's really yellow. But just like the rainbow, it changes. So it goes from the yellow to the green to the blue, and that's all that atmosphere. But those of you who are into mixing of color, you realize that yellow and orange, yellow and blue makes the green. So if you know those things, you can really take advantage of that knowledge on the sky. And I am also a firm believer that the sky and the land reflect. Now, if this was like a daytime picture, I'd probably be working more on the landscape to try to define that. And you would see, the same blue of the sky would be somewhere hidden, at least, in the colors of the composition. Because all colors have their own composition. That's just my personal belief. Now we're going to go back. It's kind of a dark purplish color. And because these darker, like more hard new pastels, if you break them off small, you get like a corner to it, so you can actually use it as a drawing device. So I'm going back to get my line again, because I always lose it a couple of times during a piece. And then I go back and I try to reestablish it so that it looks, at least, I want that line to be as close as I can to, so that it doesn't, so that the land is standing out from the sky, but it doesn't stand out as being poorly done. And then I'll just go and I'll just transition right from that line down. Trying to be careful. It's one of those times when you want to color between the lines. And then I just use that pinky really gingerly, as close as I can. I'm not going over the line, but going to the line. And what I'm going to do after that is you remember the part of the conversation about the aura. I'm going to take a pencil. It's got a kind of a reddish to it then, and just go back over it on the other side of the line. That didn't work very good, so I'm going to take a different color. And just sort of I'm trying to keep my finger over above the hilltop line so I don't get too sloppy. Okay, now that I have that, I'm going to go back again. This is very iterative, like I said, and put my kind of a gold so that it doesn't go all the way quite to the purple, but it goes close. And that way I leave my aura there, but I kind of clean up where my pencil just was so that it really blends together. Kind of a mess there. The other thing about it is where the top of this hill is, that color, you know, kind of goes as a stripe or something across that page. So, you know, just because there's a bunch of bumpies here, little bumpy hills, that color needs to go across the sky as if it was almost straight across. So the color at the top of the tallest peak may not be the same color that matches up with the lower peaks. Hope that's not too confusing. But then I'm going to stick a little bit of this gold up in here. It's a little more of a muted gold. It's not a bright gold. It's just sort of a kind of a little bit of a greenish gold, really. And kind of blend it together, blend the parts together so that they all look like those clouds are, you know, real cohesive structures, you know. Alright, so I would say I'm pretty much done with phase 2, which is to get it to be close. And I keep going back over this line until I get it the way that I like it. Now I'm putting in those details like I'm saying. So here we are back at the aura again. And that transition between the sky and the clouds, or the sky and the land, pardon me. There you go. And then I'm going to go ahead and kind of just lightly put this over top, and that makes that land glow just a little bit. It may or may not show that way in the picture, but I just sort of think that there's a reflection of the glow on that land, and I just kind of like the way that looks. You go back in here. This happens to be the same color, but against the lighter color, it's a lot more orange. That's a really neat thing about color is a color will literally change depending on what color is next to it. So if I put that next to a dark color, it becomes almost a reddish color, especially like this purple and this orange here. It kind of reddens it up. If I put it next to a green or whatever, it changes the way it looks. And so if a person is trying to learn color, there's a lot of experimentation that takes place until you kind of get the idea about how that color combination, it's not even like when the colors aren't just mixed together but just next to each other. It makes a huge difference. So you're trying to get the right color. Sometimes it's not that color that you're working on that's off. Sometimes it's actually the color that is next to it that's off. So you have to be kind of thinking outside of the box all the time, trying to solve why is this looking right or why is this looking wrong. Okay, we're going to get this to look really bright. And I'm not rubbing it too much because I want to maintain some of that brightness in that colors. Now when I get to this stage, I typically need to add in some of the softer brands of pastels because they tend to be a little bit more vibrant than the new pastels. But so I'm kind of like, just in my mind, and a lot of people use these for their whole picture, so the pastels end up very bright and vibrating, and it's pretty neat. What I'm doing is more like putting rouge on a face. So for people that are women who've done makeup, you know that it's just a little bit of rouge goes a long way. But I want to get that in there and make sure that those clouds have sort of a real natural look. And some of it's really bright and some of it's a little more muted. And that's how the clouds to me look naturally anyway. Put a little in here. Remember my composition for the color. And part of what that composition does, and you know, it doesn't have to be exactly perfect to the picture necessarily, unless you're drawing, I don't know, a portrait of a person or an animal, or you know, that's your ambition, is to get perfect. But it doesn't have to typically be perfect to give people the illusion that you're looking to give them. And this is a Sennelier. It's really soft, and so I just dab that on there, and then I just touch it because I don't want to, you know, and if it's too bright, I rub it in because I want it to look a little more blended and a little more, well, you know, it doesn't have to stick out in my mind. Sometimes I think that it's that you want to take a color and really make it stand out depending on what you're trying to accomplish with your artwork. To me, the artwork is more or less the artist's story to the other person. It's, you know, and when I moved to Montana, they had a saying here that I just love, which is, well, and I tell them my story, and they'd say, I don't think they believe me sometimes, but they say, your story, meaning they don't necessarily have to believe you, but it is your story, and you have the right to say it, and you have the right to tell it, and that's what I really like about that kind of definition for being an artist. Is I'm just trying to show you what I think is so neat about these skies in Montana. That's a lot of what I do, is skies. So I'm trying to blend that in. And this guy down here is again our star. So this is very round at the edge. It's not as easy to get a clean line with this, but and I'm not getting too near that land because I don't really want to have to go back over it 100 times. But right, there you go. And then I'm going to take my purple back up here because I lost something up in here. And it kind of when I'm looking at this now, I can see that by putting that in there was the right thing to do, but now I want to actually probably take like a green and go over that. Seems like a funny color for the sky, but there is actually where all these colors meet. There's some green in there. So that's another lesson artists have to learn, is don't be afraid to even try something that doesn't even make sense to what you've been taught, because a lot of people have been taught, you know, a lot of people will ask me questions like, do you know how to draw a horse? And I laugh because when I draw something or I paint something, I paint that object, but to me I don't look at it like, well, that's a horse and you know, this is how you draw a horse's leg. It pays to know how to do that, but in reality, I'm just drawing what I see. So each horse is an individual looking horse, for example. A lot of times people will say, well, to a little child, can you draw a cat? And then they draw a circle and put whiskers on it. And for that child, ever after, they're like, yeah, I can draw a cat, and it's a circle with whiskers on it. So in a lot of ways, you have to retrain your brain from how a lot of people were taught, just to sort of really look at a thing and really see it. Okay, I'm just going to hit the top of this. Okay, and then I'm going to finish it off with something really light to hit that final highlights here. And if I press at the edge of this now, you'll notice I'm using that harder pastel. Well, it's breaking through some of that softer color that I put on there. And so because it's kind of pushes aside the softer color to join up with the first colors I put on there because they are harder. That's the way I would describe it. And I'm going to just do a little bit here and a little bit down here. And if you're to squint your eyes, you can really see where that light should be compared to the more medium color. And I'm kind of just blending it, because clouds have a tendency to blend together. And maybe if it's not, if I don't want to highlight too much out here at the edges, I can just do a little bit lighter of this light. Because I really want them I want the person who's viewing this, who I'm trying to communicate my story to here, to actually get in there and look at what I want them to look at. And so the brightest spot is where people tend to look, or the darkest spot. Maybe it's a shape that makes them, it's kind of like the what is it that makes you look kind of a deal. And if a person sees what I'm trying to get them to look at, then I say to myself, made you look. And then I'm going to just feather this out. And I'm going to feather this out. And I'm going to kind of go up here and feather that out. And then I'm going to take this guy, and there's one really bright cloud down there. Don't know why. Just is. And another little one here. And then I'm going to finish this guy off. And then kind of bring it down here. And then down here. And make sure my lines are good here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sign it. I say she's done, and then I have to pick a color here and maybe try an orange and push it in there a little bit. Done. So I hope you enjoyed the demo. If you'd like to see more of my work, my website is www.carolzirkle.com, and Carol Zirkle is CarolZirkle. And thanks for joining me today.